Thank you very much. My name is Rita Celli. I host CBC's Ontario Today. I am in my 27th year at CBC. Yeah. And a proud alumni of the Carleton School of Journalism. So I have to start with this very inconvenient assertion. I am here to speak 7 minutes about a word I detest, openly mock, and do everything I can to avoid saying out loud. I presented this to the organizers and they said I was still welcome, so here it goes. Well, it is ubiquitous. No one would argue that. Whether you are a movie star, an athlete, a politician, an activist on any end of the political spectrum, it is a word, right? I, on the other hand, and maybe this is because I play with language and I'm trying to move people, and I think it's a boring word. I think it's overused. I think it's colorless. It's so damn adaptable. It means everything and nothing at exactly the same time. And as a journalist, I am really governed by a few principles, and one of them is show, don't tell. Be precise. Don't use adjectives. Use observable details. Every story has really been told, so the goal and our duty is to get close to that story on that day, at that hour, in this moment, and that requires its own scrutiny and purpose. Well, that's what I thought all my anti-impact intensity was about, and then I started reflecting more about this presentation, and I realized that there's more. When I hear it, I freeze. I stop listening. And as someone who communicates in a public space, this is terrifying. I'm looking at you here. I want to hold you. I want you to stay longer. If you're listening, I want you to stay in the car or in the foyer and not turn the channel. And so I realize that is part of the aversion. Now, I manage to do this to people in all kinds of ways because I do see the email traffic. But something about that word, impact. So, notwithstanding all of that, the goal remains the same. The goal is to affect, to disrupt, to agitate, to create a kind of discomfort, and to provoke, to try and create meaning. I mean, I think that's the part I probably fall into in the Impact series tonight. I mean, I try a lot behind the scenes to create a framework from which, in this improv of open line radio, one could hear some meaning. So on the surface, an open line radio show is a pretty old-fashioned, low-budget concept. Radio plus telephone equals program. But a lot can go wrong on the way to a microphone, and I can tell you that I take very seriously the idea that I don't want to have a kind of take it or leave it product. I view this radio show as a canvas, and like a singer or a songwriter, the goal again is to move people. I'm going to talk more about why that's so important. I have twin daggers hanging over my head every single day, and in the middle of the night when I'm worrying. Here's number one. I don't care what random people think. And it's not a product. I can't come on the radio and say, hey, coming up at noon, a bunch of random strangers are going to talk about random things you know nothing about. It's not a product. It's not. And number two, I can never imagine calling a radio show. So think of the juxtaposition in my own head. I want people to do this. I don't know that I would. I can't imagine stopping, making a sandwich for my child, or pulling over my car. But this is precisely the goal every day, is to move someone so deeply, so profoundly. They woke up that morning, they didn't think that they would have to, that they would be compelled to have to pick up the phone and call a radio show. And it's important to have that depth of emotion because there is a sincerity and power in the human voice and story. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. One of the things I want to say is that there's a beautiful and rare thing that I also try to honor as a public steward of this space called Open Line Radio on your Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is that it's not a silo. I mean, we all know what those are. We look in the world we spend time, whether it's in real time or online, with people who affirm our values and the way we see things. But I can attest to this, that CBC Radio at noon, the program that I have the privilege of hosting, you'll hear the 20-year-old vegan cyclist in the GTA, and you'll hear the pro-Trump person in Mississauga and everything else in between. I mean, it still happens. And I want to talk about this power of the human voice, and I want to put it in the context of something journalistically that I think about a lot. And that is the analogy of the courtroom. And to me, the voice is the evidence. I think about my own role as kind of prosecutor and defense, and that is to say that everyone gets a hearing. It's not about just listening. It's not about venting and then moving on to the next thing, and somehow you hope randomly it all means something. It means respecting everyone in their own space and challenging them. So even if, it seems like a reasonable point of view, people work harder if you push a little bit more. They try harder to persuade, and that's the evidence. You get to decide as a listener the depth of that sincerity, or, oh, I never thought of it that way, or you're ready to write someone off, and then, you have this unexpected empathy, perhaps, to see something differently. Or you may conclude that someone is right off their rocker. C'est à vous. It's the evidence. You judge. And I do believe in a democracy that this is fundamental, that citizens are triers of fact, to go back to this idea of what that means. But facts aren't just numbers and dates. And I have to say that, and I'll say this as a longtime broadcaster, that I do mourn this in my own industry, because there has been a deliberate shift, and you can see it everywhere in broadcasting, where there's a lot more spotlight on the journalist, right? The journalist will tell you what's happening, why it's important, and all these sorts of things. And there's less and less audio of principal actors. And for me, and I do take this seriously, I use audio a lot because I think it has its own intrinsic persuasive qualities, so in terms of setting up a program, but then wanting you, as the triers of fact, as citizens, to hear the evidence and you decide. I'm going to give you some examples. I probably have too many. I've done this, I think, more than 10 years, yes. And I'm sorry I didn't take notes along the way, because there are times where I've internalized so much and I worry and think about it, a show, a person, for a long, long time. But calling a radio show is a little bit like an airport chat. People, strangers, those strangers I referred to, do call up because they want to say something. And I get to also ask questions that I couldn't ask people in my own life. I mean, there's some things, how do you begin? Where do you ask? Too touchy, too intrusive, it would spoil too much. So, like you, I'm the driver's seat, but I am like you. I'm learning, and I get a chance to dare to ask what I really want to know. So when I talk about not caring what people have to say, I mean, it's the randomness of it. But I dare to ask what I really, really want to know, and think that a lot of us might want to know. So, I mean, I've got, a million examples. And, talk about the sex trade on public radio at lunchtime. phone lines light up. Could have gone on for hours. Is it just another job was the discussion that day. Why do you drive stoned? Well, let's ask. Why do you drive drunk? Let's ask. Tell us about your abortion, which, I can say, and one of my managers is here, it sounds a little off when you say, I'm going to go on the radio at lunch and ask people about their abortion. It wasn't about their motive. It was just, what would you tell someone if someone dared to ask? And I could go on, right? Like the idea of, we're in a society where we say, let's talk about mental illness, but really, to take that further and create more meaning is, why did you stop? Why did you decide to stay? How did you correct the thinking? When doctors talk about correcting the thinking, and these are the sorts of conversations, these big emotion sort of conversations that, for me, always show how human we are, how the same we all are. I was thinking about it's not in my notes, but it was coming to me as I was sitting here tonight listening. I a few years ago now, invited Ken Dryden to come on the air to talk about something very personal for him, a very deep regret that he had for not doing more, he felt, when he was the head of Maple Leaf Gardens. And many of us know the sad and long story of sexual abuse there. And I knew, going in, I knew that I'm going to put this esteemed hockey great on the radio, that it would shake someone's equilibrium. Someone was going to started their day and something would shatter for them to hear him. And the depth of his sincerity and that sense of regret that he had. And I won't tell you about that whole program, but I'll tell you about an email I got from a listener who said they were walking into a grocery store here in Ottawa, and there was a man, sort of with the door slightly ajar, sitting with the car running, listening, and they could hear the program. And when she came out about 20 minutes later, he was still there, and he was just crying, sitting in his seat. We might speculate on what that meant to him. I can't know. Try to create meaning, a forum where people can extract some kind of meaning. I can only give it my most sincere intention that there is some kind of pro-social thinking and intent on my part. But I can't control what happens, and I certainly can't control how people receive the information. We recently did a program, a couple actually, but just in January, so I'll offer this little example on alcoholism and a kind of pill that can help reduce the cravings for people who have, an addiction to alcohol. And it sounds almost miraculous. It's very effective. It's very cheap. Why aren't they handing this out like candy? We're talking about this on the radio. A 30-year-old woman called in from Stratford and said, I had to fight my doctor to get this pill. Until I was 28, I was drop dead drunk every single night. This has given me back my life. In any case, we got an email from a woman not long after that program saying that she had gone to a Toronto clinic to ask for this medication. I was told 4 people before me also visited the clinic as a result of listening to the program. A nurse at the Rapid Access to Addictions Medicine in Toronto Western Hospital also wrote to us to say that since the program had aired, multiple people had been coming into the clinic to ask for this medication. One person drove 3 hours to come and get it, and she was over the moon. I mean, what more could we ask for? In journalism, many times you want to, there's a more easy or more clear kind of yardstick when a government might change a rule or there's a reversal. This canvas that I use is not as direct all the time. So it's quite satisfying to get that kind of feedback. Sometimes it's been odd. I remember doing a little show on a wine that had gotten a glowing review in the Globe and Mail, kind of, $10 a bottle, but it's like 20, and the LCBO didn't want to participate, and so by the time we were off the air and people were queuing up all over Ontario. Anyway, the LCBO had dispatched a communications service to tell us essentially, cease and desist. I know. So these days, what I do a lot of is talking with angry people and trying to create a thaw in the kind of public discourse that has seized us. I found myself Googling this very thing in February 2017 and found myself on psychology blogs where I found that is exactly what I was doing. I was trying to validate people's feelings, their alienated feelings, without validating what they're saying. And so I'm playing in a new and risky territory, even for me, and asking people questions like, why do you chant "lock her up" to Kathleen Wynne? Why do you hate the carbon tax? Why do you remain skeptical about climate change? There's one woman who wrote in, and so I've got it here, and I've got to wrap up, but she was scrubbing. She just started scrubbing more furiously at her stove when she heard the program and said, wow! And she was reacting to someone who called in to say that they believed the earth was flat. So I was going to end with an Auden poem that I think about a fair bit, but I'm out of time, and I'll save it for later, because I opened up my newspaper this morning, and this seems like a more appropriate place to kind of bring this a bit full circle. And it was a story about a great newspaper man who passed away this week by the name of Clark Davey, and he's someone I knew and admired and loved very much. And the lead, I'd like to read it to you because it really did jump out at me in the context of today. He was a champion of Canadian journalism and the sort of work, in his words, and this is the quotation, that has the kind of impact that moves people's hearts and their minds, that stirs their sense of justice and changes the rules and the laws to make our society a better place. Yeah, I agree. He was a lover of words and ideas and books and complex things, and I thought, I clearly have to be less dismissive of the word and keep my eye on the goal. Thank you very much.